Welcome to Bleeding Walls, the home of the creepiest and most spine-chilling true horror stories from schools around the world. Tonight, you're about to hear 9 terrifying tales about teachers that will haunt your thoughts long after the video ends. If you love true scary stories that send shivers down your spine, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on the darkest secrets lurking behind classroom doors. Get ready, because these stories aren't just scary, they're disturbingly real. Stay with us if you dare, and remember, the creepiest teacher story you've ever heard might just be the one coming next. My new school, I thought the teachers would be the usual kind. Strict, maybe a little boring, but nothing frightening. That all changed the day Mr. Barrett walked into our classroom. On the surface, he looked like a typical teacher, wearing a tweed jacket, glasses perched on his nose, and carrying a stack of papers. But something was off about him, something subtle that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. From the very first lesson, Mr. Barrett had a peculiar way of making us feel uneasy. He rarely smiled, and when he did, it was like the grin slowly stretched too wide, as if it was forced. His eyes, behind those thick glasses, seemed to watch every little thing with an unsettling intensity. When the class was noisy or distracted, his voice would drop to an unnerving whisper, and suddenly the room felt colder, the air heavier. We didn't dare speak out of turn, not because he told us to, but because a strange silence seemed to fill the room whenever he looked our way. One day, he started telling us stories during class. Stories that didn't seem to belong in school. Tales of old, abandoned classrooms where students simply vanished without a trace. Stories about strange shadows that watched from dark corners. Warnings about never trusting certain teachers who weren't what they seemed. At first, we thought it was just a way to keep us interested, but as the days went by, the stories began overlapping with strange happenings in the school. Students reported seeing flickers of movement when the hallways were empty, hearing footsteps behind them, though no one was there. Sometimes, during Mr. Barrett's lessons, the lights would flicker, and for a split second, his face looked less human, his eyes gleaming with something cold and distant. We caught whispers of students checking the teacher's desk and finding old photographs of children with their faces scratched out as if erased from memory forever. The most chilling part was when a few students started feeling watched, not just by Mr. Barrett, but by something lurking just beyond sight. One girl swore she heard a soft humming sound carrying through the air whenever he paced silently around the room. On colder days, frost appeared on the windows in strange, twisting shapes, even when there was no reason for it. Our parents tried to reach out to the school administration, but no one seemed to take the complaints seriously. And then, one afternoon, during a particularly tense lesson when Mr. Barrett was in a hushed, threatening mood, the classroom door slammed shut violently all on its own. We all jumped, looking at him for an explanation, but his grim expression didn't change. When the principal finally came in after the commotion, he acted as if nothing unusual had happened. But we all knew better. The creeping dread didn't stop until the end of the semester, when Mr. Barrett mysteriously vanished after one day's class. Searching his desk, the janitor found strange symbols etched under the wood and a journal filled with cryptic writings about shadows and teachers who never leave. The school never explained what happened to him, but the leftover unease was palpable. Even years later, former students whispered about the feeling of being watched in that classroom, about the cold spots that refused to warm, and about the quiet dread that settled whenever one thought of Mr. Barrett. Some said he was more than just a creepy teacher. He was a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying things aren't monsters or ghosts, but the ones who walk among us, barely seen, watching, waiting. During my final year of a high school, we had a new teacher for psychology, Ms. Harlow. At first, she seemed like your typical enthusiastic educator, passionate about the mind and behavior. But soon, her lessons started to twist the way we saw not only her, but ourselves and reality itself. It began subtly, with her asking questions that probed deeper than any teacher had before, a curiosity that felt more like an intrusion into personal and private thoughts rather than academic exploration. Miss Harlow had this way of speaking, soft but penetrating, and her gaze never wavered, as if she was searching for hidden thoughts behind our eyes. Instead of textbooks, she encouraged us to delve into personal experiences, memories, and emotions, urging us to remember things we had long forgotten or preferred to ignore. Her assignments weren't typical essays, but exercises in introspection that sometimes left us feeling exposed and vulnerable. What was most unsettling was how the boundaries between the classroom and the real world began to blur. After a few weeks, some students started to experience strange phenomena. One day, I remember vividly, a friend swore that during class, the air thickened and the walls seemed to pulse with a slow, rhythmic beat, like a heartbeat. Another complained of hearing faint whispers echoing just beyond comprehension, as if the classroom itself was alive and listening. Ms. Harlow often spoke about the shadows within us, the parts of our minds we don't confront, and she claimed that by facing these shadows, we could unlock hidden potential, or, as she ominously said, inviting what lies beneath to step into the light. What unsettled us most was how she seemed to know our darkest fears and secrets without us ever telling her. It was as if she could see through the layers we put up, draining our defenses with quiet precision. Several students began having vivid nightmares, each uniquely horrifying and personal. One boy dreamt of himself trapped in an endless labyrinth with faceless versions of Miss Harlow, whispering cryptic warnings. Another girl dreamt of losing control of her own body, forced to relive traumatic moments with Miss Harlow watching silently. These nightmares bled into their waking hours, leaving them disoriented and restless. A few classmates confided that Miss Harlow had changed towards them outside class, sometimes cruel, sometimes uncannily empathetic, in ways that made us question how much of what was real. Reports surfaced that she had shown up at local gatherings, places students had never told her about, reinforcing the feeling that she was everywhere and nowhere at once, watching, waiting. The psychological strain grew, and some students tried talking to the school counselors, but the counselors found nothing wrong and suggested it was stress from finals. The administration, intrigued but cautious, began observing Ms. Harlow silently, but she always presented an impeccable front, with no hint of the intensity we felt in class. My breaking point came when, during a particular lesson, Ms. Harlow asked us to close our eyes and meet the shadow within. I shut my eyes and instantly felt a crushing pressure building inside, panic clawing at my chest. When I opened them, the classroom was empty except for her. She smiled, a slow and triumphant smile, and whispered, "You can't hide anything from me." Suddenly, everything felt warped. The floor seemed to ripple. Lights flickered, and I swore I saw her shadow detach from her body and stretch towards me. From then on, the line between reality and the strange world Miss Harlow summoned grew thinner. Friends stopped attending class, some transferred schools, and a few dropped out entirely. Rumors spread that Miss Harlow was not an ordinary teacher but something else entirely. Maybe a force feeding off fear and secrets, drawing strength from the torment she inflicted. When the year finally ended, Miss Harlow disappeared as mysteriously as she had arrived. Her classroom was locked, and the files on her were sealed away. Students left behind were forever changed, haunted by the feeling that part of her lingered in their minds, whispering from the shadows long after the school bell rang. This wasn't just a teacher with a creepy streak. It was an experience that forced us to question what was real and what dwelled in the darkest corners of the mind. And maybe the scariest part was realizing that some shadows, once invited in, are impossible to send away. It was my sophomore year when the school welcomed a new substitute teacher named Mrs. Whitmore. Unlike other substitutes who came and went with little fanfare, she left an impression that quickly turned from admiration to unease. She was elegant, almost ethereal, with pale skin and silver-streaked black hair that seemed to shimmer strangely under the fluorescent lights. There was something quiet and deliberate in her movements, as if she glided rather than walked. Mrs. Whitmore didn't say much at first, letting the days stretch in an uneasy silence broken only by her slow, deliberate instruction. The students admired her calm demeanor, but whispers began to spread, whispers full of inexplicable sightings and strange encounters tied to her presence. For one, some students swore they saw her appear and disappear suddenly in the hallway, as if fading in and out of sight. Others reported a subtle chill whenever she passed by, a coldness that seeped into the bones beyond any ordinary draft. Then the stories got darker. It started with fleeting shadows seen out of the corner of the eye, dark shapes that seemed to flicker near Mrs. Whitmore but vanished when directly looked at. Some felt like they were being watched even when she was out of the room, an oppressive feeling that refused to dissipate. Students who stayed late after class reported hearing faint whispers in the empty halls, voices that seemed to carry her name in a language none could understand. One evening, a group of friends decided to investigate after school. As the building emptied and the sun dipped below the horizon, the school transformed into a place far less familiar. The quiet creaks and groans of the old structure seemed louder, and shadows lengthened unnaturally. Suddenly, near the old auditorium where she was said to have last taught for the day, a door swung open by itself. The friends peeked inside to see Mrs. Whitmore standing in the center of the dim room, surrounded by flickering candles and strange symbols scrawled on the walls. The air was thick with an eerie energy as she chanted softly in that same undecipherable language. The friends froze, watching as the shadows on the walls began to writhe and grow, twisting into faces and figures that looked both human and not. It was as if she was calling out to something beyond this realm, something ancient and hungry. Word quickly spread, but when teachers and staff checked the auditorium the next day, it was just an empty, dusty room. The candles melted into wax pools, and the symbols wiped clean as if erased by unseen hands. No one could explain what the students had witnessed. Mrs. Whitmore's schedule suddenly changed, and she no longer appeared in the classrooms, only in fleeting glimpses walking the hallways late at night. The strangest part was that several former students who had never met Mrs. Whitmore claimed to have dreams of her figure, glowing faintly in the dark. Some woke feeling touched by cold hands, as if a ghostly presence lingered near their beds. And then there were the rumors that old yearbooks held no photograph of her, as if she never officially existed on campus records. One chilling afternoon, during a particularly gloomy autumn storm, the power went out while Mrs. Whitmore was supervising an art class. In the candlelight, she told the students about the history of the school, how it had been built on land with a dark past, where restless spirits sometimes wandered the halls. She spoke softly about the balance between the living and the dead, about teachers who were guardians against forces seeking to cross over. Before anyone could ask more, the lights flickered back on, and she was gone, vanished without a trace as utterly as she had appeared months before. Attempts to contact her ended in silence. The school archives had no records of a Mrs. Whitmore ever employed. Her legacy was only the growing unease among students, the odd shadows in the corners of classrooms, and the lingering sense that some teachers never truly leave. To this day, students say that late in the evenings, if you walk silently down the corridors near the auditorium, you can still hear the faint chanting carried on the wind and catch a glimpse of a pale figure with silver-streaked hair, watching and waiting, forever bound to the restless spirits she once sought to control. It was the start of my last year in high school when we got a new chemistry teacher, Mr. Fink. At first, he seemed like any other teacher, stern but somewhat approachable. But there was something about him that unnerved the whole school from day one. Rumors began circulating before he even set foot in our classroom. Whispers about his strange past, tales that he had been treated in a mental institution and was back under mysterious circumstances. We laughed it off as typical teenage gossip until the day we met him. The class was chaotic on his first day. Students were restless, chatting loudly and throwing paper balls around. Suddenly, the classroom door slammed open with a violent bang. Mr. Fink stormed in, wild-eyed, with disheveled hair that looked like it had been electrocuted, and an unsettling expression that sent a shiver down everyone's spine. He slammed a stack of books on the desk and shouted at us in a high-pitched voice that immediately silenced the room. He wouldn't tolerate nonsense, misbehavior, or disrespect in his class. His eyes scanned the room like a predator locking on to its prey. He insisted we call him Dr. Fink and made it brutally clear that there would be no exceptions to his rules. His tone was nothing short of menacing. It wasn't just strictness. It was pure intimidation. The air felt thick and charged with something dangerous. From that moment, every lesson became a terrifying ordeal. The students went silent, fearful that any small mistake could unleash his wrath. As days passed, the school's atmosphere shifted, growing darker and heavier. Some students heard rumors from staff that the principal had hastily transferred the previous teacher and that Mr. Fink had a volatile history involving explosive chemicals. The tension escalated when strange incidents began happening in the chemistry lab, odd smells, faint hissing noises, and the distant echo of metal clanking. There were whispered reports of volatile substances mysteriously disappearing and reappearing in places they shouldn't be. One afternoon, during a particularly stressful lesson, Mr. Fink's volatility reached its peak. A careless student accidentally dropped a beaker, and Mr. Fink snapped. His shouts morphed into wild screams, and he began smashing lab equipment and tearing through the classroom in a frenzy. The terrified students froze as he screamed about revenge and destruction, threatening to burn the school down and dance on the ashes. His madness seemed fully unleashed, and his presence was menacing enough to make the hair on the back of everyone's neck stand up. The situation took a shocking turn when police arrived following a tip-off from concerned staff. It was discovered that Mr. Fink had been secretly preparing explosives and volatile chemicals in the lab, plans to blow the school up during his tenure. His sudden outbursts and terrifying threats were no act. The authorities intervened just in time, preventing what could have been a catastrophic disaster. Mr. Fink was removed immediately, and the school spent weeks recovering from the trauma of his presence. For many students, the experience left lasting scars. Hallways once full of youthful energy now felt charged with residual fear. Parents demanded answers, and counselors worked overtime to make sense of the nightmare that had unfolded within the walls they trusted. In the aftermath, people would whisper about the day the school came close to disaster because of a teacher who had lost his mind, or perhaps revealed a darker side never meant to see the light. Some said they could still feel the oppressive energy in the chemistry lab, a reminder of how suddenly terror can invade even the most everyday places. Even years later, former students recall the terror in Mr. Fink's eyes, and the day when a classroom full of teenagers became a scene of chaos they would never forget. It was a sudden shock that turned their lives upside down, a terrifying memory that lingered like a shadow over the last year of their school days. In my sophomore year, our school hired a new history teacher named Mr. Caldwell. At first glance, he was the kind of man you'd expect to see in a history documentary. Tall, thin, with a serious face and eyes that seemed to hold deep, distant memories. His voice was calm and measured, but there was an undeniable weight in his presence, as if he carried the burden of 1,000 untold stories. The unsettling part wasn't in his teaching style, which was strict but engaging. It was what people began to whisper in the hallways. Rumors about Mr. Caldwell's past that hinted at something far darker than the usual teacher troubles. Some said he'd once been involved in a military operation gone horribly wrong. Others murmured about a tragedy in his family that left scars deeper than anyone could see. No one knew for sure because Mr. Caldwell never spoke of his life outside school, but something about his eyes told those of us paying attention that the past clung to him like a shadow, refusing to leave. His lessons took on a somber tone, as if his knowledge wasn't just academic, but painfully personal. One day, when discussing a local historical event involving a tragic fire that claimed many lives decades ago, his voice cracked slightly. He told us how the school where we now studied was built near the site of that fire. What unsettled us was not the lesson itself, but the way his gaze lingered on the window as if lost in a memory no one else could see. Strange things started happening around that time. Small at first, like books falling off shelves in the history room or the lights flickering whenever Mr. Caldwell entered. Some students claimed the air would grow inexplicably cold when he spoke of certain events. One girl whispered to me that she saw a figure in old-fashioned clothing lurking near the school's old wing late at night, a figure she was certain was connected to the history lessons we were being given. One day, after school, a few of us gathered courage to ask Mr. Caldwell if the rumors about his past were true. He paused, eyes clouding over with pain, before he quietly began his story. Years ago, he had been part of a secretive unit in a war that had left him haunted. The war wasn't just battlefields and enemies, it was close to home. His own family had been caught in the crossfire. One tragic night, a fire devastated the home they lived in, and he was the only survivor. That time had marked him, and though he had tried to move on, those memories never truly left. He confessed that he came to teaching not just to share history, but to grapple with his own ghosts. Yet, as the years passed, the weight of what he had lived through clung to him tightly, manifesting in ways many found eerie. Some believed the spirits of those lost in the fire still lingered near the school, drawn to him and his pain. One evening, a group of students who stayed late in the library heard soft sobbing coming from the history classroom. When they investigated, the room was empty, but the desk was covered in old, charred photographs and letters carefully laid out, telling a story of love, loss, and regret. The scent of smoke hung in the air, though there was no fire. After that night, the whispers grew louder among students that Mr. Caldwell was not just haunted by memories, but by something lingering, an unquiet spirit tied to that tragic past. The school administration never confirmed any of it, but slowly, Mr. Caldwell began taking more frequent absences. The last we heard, he left suddenly, without explanation, leaving his classroom as it was, frozen in time like a shrine to a life shadowed by loss. Former students who crossed paths with him later said his eyes shone with both sorrow and relief, as if leaving the school also meant leaving some part of his burden behind. Even now, on cold and misty mornings, some claim you can see a lone figure standing by the edge of the school grounds, staring out silently as if waiting for something or someone. And when the wind whistles through the old hallways, the faint scent of smoke and the echoes of a grieving voice seem to remind us that some scars run deeper than the past, and some teachers carry shadows far heavier than textbooks can explain. In our town, there was a chilling urban legend that every student whispered about, but no one wanted to openly discuss. The story of Miss Graves, the midnight teacher who haunted our school long after she was gone. The legend said she was a formidable and feared teacher in the late 1970s, but her story didn't end with the school bell. Miss Graves was known for her strictness and cold demeanor, often pushing students to their limits. But one fateful evening, as she was leaving the school, there was a tragic accident. A reckless student speeding near the school struck her, and she died instantly. What made the story terrifying wasn't just her untimely death, but what happened afterward. Students claimed that Miss Graves never left the premises. Instead, her spirit lingered in the hallways, emerging only at night when the school was empty and silent. The true horror began with those brave or foolish enough to stay after hours. Rumors spread that if you were caught wandering the school after midnight, you might encounter Miss Graves herself. Some spoke of hearing the echoing click of her heels down the corridors, footsteps growing louder and closer, but whenever you turned, no one was there. Others swore they saw a shadowy figure with piercing eyes watching from classroom windows, somehow both near and impossibly far. What sent waves of dread through the student body was the connection between the legend and a series of disappearances. Since Miss Graves died, several students had gone missing, all last seen at school after dark or near the areas she was rumored to haunt. Searches yielded no clues, but the theory was whispered in hushed tones. Miss Graves was exacting revenge, punishing those who disrespected her or defied the school rules she had once enforced so fiercely. One night, a group of students decided to prove the legend wrong. Armed with flashlights and shaky courage, they crept into the school just before midnight. As the clock struck 12, the building grew unnervingly cold, their breaths visible in the air. Their footsteps echoed in the empty halls, but soon the quiet was shattered by a faint tapping sound, heels clicking relentlessly, approaching nearer, faster, until it seemed to envelop them. Panic set in as lights flickered and doors slammed shut on their own. Faces appeared in windows where no one should be, silent warnings from the past. They fled, barely escaping before the front doors locked behind them with a resonant thud. From that night on, none of them doubted the truth of the midnight teacher. Teachers and staff tend to dismiss it as childish superstition, but students and locals know better. The legend of Miss Graves remains alive, a chilling reminder that some stories are born from fear but become real in their own way. And if you ever hear the sharp tap of heels echoing down your school's hallway long after dark, it might just be Miss Graves, still guarding her territory and demanding respect in the only way she knows, through terror. During my junior year, the whole school was shaken by the arrival of a new gym teacher named Mr. Broughton. On the surface, he seemed tough and demanding, someone who expected discipline and respect. But it wasn't long before rumors swirled about his volatile temper and unsettling tendencies. The tension in his classes was palpable, and students often joked nervously about his look, an intense, almost wild glare that suggested he was barely holding himself in check. From the very beginning, Mr. Broughton made it clear he wouldn't tolerate any disrespect or defiance. His methods were harsh, and his control over the class was absolute, but there was something darker beneath his stern exterior. Several students whispered about how he sometimes singled out certain kids, pushing them beyond their limits in ways that felt less about discipline and more about something like intimidation. The true horror began when a confrontation escalated in the middle of gym class one afternoon. One of the biggest students, Francis, was known for challenging authority, and he wasn't afraid to push back. But this time, things spiraled out of control, the gym filled with tension as Mr. Broughton's wrath unleashed like a storm. Witnesses later described a terrifying moment when Mr. Broughton grabbed Francis by the throat with terrifying strength, his hands like iron clamps. The struggle was violent and frightening, with Francis barely able to gasp for air. What followed was even more shocking. Mr. Broughton dragged Francis towards a window that could only open a crack, but still enough room to be dangerous. With a cruel, chilling intent, he forced Francis's head into the narrow opening. The entire class froze in stunned silence, the scene unfolding like a nightmare. The palpable fear of the students was matched only by the cold, merciless look in Mr. Broughton's eyes, a look that suggested he enjoyed the power he wielded. Fortunately, the violence stopped before it went further, but the damage was done. Francis was left shaken, both physically and emotionally, and the school community was thrown into chaos. Parents demanded answers, and a police investigation followed. It was soon revealed that Mr. Broughton had a dark history. Previous incidents of aggressive and dangerous behavior had been overlooked or swept under the rug. Adding to the nightmare, other students came forward with stories of threats and punishments that went beyond acceptable discipline. Some spoke of being cornered, shouted at, and even physically intimidated. The atmosphere of fear became so thick that attending gym class felt like stepping into a battleground. The line between teacher and tormentor had been crossed, and the school found itself grappling with how to protect students from someone in authority who had become a serious threat. Eventually, Mr. Broughton was removed from the school, but the scars he left lingered. Students who had endured his class swore they could still feel the oppressive weight of that fear whenever they walked by the gym. Counseling sessions were filled with stories of anxiety and nightmares. The sense of safety in classrooms had been shattered, replaced by a raw memory of how quickly power could be abused. This story is a chilling reminder that sometimes the greatest threats come from those trusted with care and control. Mr. Broughton's terrifying rage and physical menace turned a place of learning into a place of dread, an experience that nobody who lived through it would ever forget. It was during my senior year that our school was assigned a new substitute math teacher named Mr. Callahan. From the beginning, his presence was strange but not immediately terrifying, just oddly intense, as if he carried a weight no one could see. His voice was calm, yet there was an eerie stillness about him that made the classroom feel colder whenever he spoke. Many of us thought it was just nerves from having a substitute, but things quickly escalated beyond the ordinary. Soon into his tenure, odd occurrences started happening whenever Mr. Callahan was around. Objects in the classroom would shift slightly when no one was looking, papers fluttering as if caught in a sudden breeze despite closed windows. The lights frequently flickered, sometimes plunging the room into near darkness for brief, unsettling moments. Some of the more sensitive students began reporting an oppressive feeling, as if unseen eyes were watching us from just outside our vision. The air would sometimes grow heavy and hard to breathe, and a low whispering seemed to float on the edge of hearing, though no one ever caught the words. One day, it became clear something far beyond normal was happening. During a test, as we sat quietly, the overhead lights dimmed sharply, and the room plunged into a chilling twilight. Mr. Callahan remained seated at his desk, eyes closed, murmuring under his breath in a language none of us recognized. The shadows on the walls seemed to ripple and lengthen, distorting and twisting as if alive. Several students swore the room's corners darkened unnaturally, and figures appeared and disappeared just beyond comprehension. A few students began to panic, unable to focus, their hearts racing uncontrollably. The next incident was more direct. Mr. Callahan invited a student to the board, but as she stepped forward, her face suddenly paled. She gasped and froze, eyes wide with terror, staring at something no one else could see. Then her body jerked violently before collapsing to the floor, convulsing as if gripped by an invisible force. Panic erupted as others rushed to her side. Mr. Callahan just sat silently, expression unreadable, and simply said, "The shadows are close." Following that day, our school was rife with whispers. Stories spread about Mr. Callahan's past, a vague history of involvement with occult practices and unexplained disappearances at previous schools where he taught. Some said he was a conduit for dark forces, a teacher whose connection to the paranormal had been growing stronger and more dangerous. The administration tried to dismiss the rumors, but even teachers started avoiding his classes. One evening, a group of brave students stayed late to confront the unsettling phenomena. As the clock ticked past midnight, they watched as the classroom transformed. Eerie blue lights glowed faintly from the corners, and ghostly figures emerged from the shadows, some whispering lost memories, others screaming in silent agony. Mr. Callahan appeared in the center, chanting in the strange tongue, seemingly commanding these spectral visitors. The students fled in terror, but the legend of Mr. Callahan only grew. By the time he left the school weeks later, several students reported waking to find shadowy figures watching them from the corners of their rooms. Some claimed their nightmares now included the haunting presence of the math teacher, whose eyes seemed to burn with an otherworldly fire. Years later, those who had experienced his classes still shudder at the memory. and many whisper that Mr. Callahan wasn't just a teacher, but a gatekeeper between our world and something far darker lurking beyond the veil. His brief time at the school revealed that sometimes the most terrifying encounters are those caught between reality and the supernatural.